Hey, everybody. Welcome to Connecting Cannabis. I am your host, Brian Haller. This episode is, of course, brought to you, as always, by Wrazel. Wrazel is your B2B cannabis business resource. Please stop there. Check out our services index, our business database, or certainly in our investment marketplace if you're a business owner looking to raise capital or a investor looking for an opportunity. Today, we'll be speaking with Dan Humiston, founder and CEO of MJ Bulls. Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Brian. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Always good to talk to you. Tell the audience a little bit about what MJ Bulls is.
Well, first, I'm glad to be on the other side of this for a change. Normally, I'm the person that has to put together these interviews.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's MJ Bulls is. We started off as just one podcast. It was we did the Raising Cannabis Capital podcast as kind of a way to bridge from moving from one company to another, and just I was killing some time, so I started the podcast, and then it's really morphed into more of a multiple podcast, almost we refer to it as a cannabis podcast network. I have 7 shows on here right now. We're producing shows for other podcasters, other cannabis industry podcasters who wanted to do a show but didn't want to do the work involved and just wanted to tape it. And so that's how that's where it's gone. And we've, it's like I said, it's really morphed into a lot more than just a simple podcast.
Absolutely. In fact, building a network isn't just something you kind of do. You grow into it, you figure it out, as you might guess, we're talking about podcasting today. Certainly, podcasting is always a viable option for a great content strategy. Joining a network is something that if you have a good podcast, you might want to consider, and we'll talk about a few of those things today. Most notably, how they're not as easy as you think.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, there's so much more to it than people think, and I always feel like it's one of those ideas that, and especially business owners, feel like, oh my gosh, this is going to solve all of our problems. We're going to have a podcast, and it's going to be, and they burn out because it doesn't solve all your problems. It's just one. It should just be one arm or one vehicle within a multifaceted marketing campaign or marketing strategy or messaging strategy for your company. And that's where I think it's because it's not hard. It's just there's a lot of time consuming aspects of it.
Yeah, I think the word that comes to mind always, at least for me, is consistency.
Yeah,
it's not necessarily difficult, especially once you get into the routine, right? Once you really understand every step and how your particular flow works for your particular podcast, it is easier to crank out episodes. What is tough is to maintain doing that, and to, at least to your point, I think a lot of businesses think that it is like a magic pill.
You're exactly right. I tell people a lot of times people will come to me and say, "Oh, I got a great idea for a cannabis podcast," and usually what I find is that most people, the scope of their podcast is way too big.
Right.
And I say to them, first thing is, who's your audience? Like, who is your audience? And then the second thing is, what type of emotion do you hope to elicit in that audience? What do you want them? How do you want them to feel after they listen to your show? And when people take the time to really think through it and they realize, hey, everybody isn't my audience. Like, this group of people are my audience, and I want them to leave this feeling really happy, or I want them leaving this feeling like they've just been informed. That you start to answer a lot of questions that from there, those answer a lot of questions, moving forward. And that's kind of how what we do when we're working with different people that are putting together an idea for a show. Because back to your point, what happens is you run out of content pretty quickly. Even though you don't think you will, you run out of content pretty quickly. I mean, a 30-minute show, you can go through quite a bit of stuff. And if you don't have a strategy, you find yourself in all different places, and then the audience is just like, why am I listening to this? I like the content that they had in their first episode, but they haven't had anything I'm interested in the last 5.
Yeah, hence the importance of a niche, which is interesting because I'm sure there's people out there that will think, oh, well, my niche is cannabis.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about that is, like, so here I am talking to the founder and CEO of a cannabis podcast network. Dan, why don't you explain the differences in the 7 shows that you have on the platform currently?
Well, and this is a really good, I think was a great segue, because the narrowness, I like to say, try to be narrow and deep. Like, that's the goal. If you can be narrow and deep, you may not be the podcast for everybody, but the people that are listening to your podcast, you're going to own those people, and you can be the best at that section. So our first show was Raising Cannabis Capital, and it was just about companies that were raising money. And we gave them an opportunity to essentially give us an elevator pitch. The show's really fast. It's 10 minutes, and they talk about their business and they talk about what they're raising. And that show just took off. It was great. There was a lot of companies that were raising money, a lot of people interested in companies raising money. Mm-hmm. And so, like I said, that show just really took off. And then around the time at the end of 2018, the Farm Bill got passed.
That's right.
And so I could just see there was an opportunity for hemp. And I knew Joy Beckerman, who is just a hemp superstar. She's been a hemp leader in the hemp industry for over 30 years. I mean, back way before hemp was cool. She was the leader, and she knows everybody. Yeah. So she had an opportunity. So she said, "Yeah, I'd love to do a show." She just brings in all of her old friends and they just have talks, and it is so cool listening to these are really the hemp barons. Yep. So again, that's a niche. And then I had 2 older deadheads, Jim Marty and Larry Michigan. These guys are in their late 50s, early 60s, followed the dead for hundreds and hundreds of shows. Right. And now Larry's is a cannabis CPA or an attorney, works at Hope and Law. Jim Marty runs the largest cannabis CPA firm in the country. So they know cannabis, but they also know dead stories and concerts. And you would be shocked how many people, well, maybe you wouldn't be, but how many influential people in the cannabis industry were deadheads that have so many stories. I mean, it's great listening to them. So that, like, again, it's kind of narrowly defined. It's the Deadhead Cannabis Show, very narrowly defined. But and so those are just, that just gives you a kind of a glimpse at what we're doing. Is we're trying to find these little areas that these guys own. So when you talk about cannabis and Deadhead, if you want to listen to a show, they own that spot. They own that segment. Other shows may wander in there, sure, but if you want this on a daily basis or a weekly basis, if you want that as your a menu of that, you got it.
Yeah, and I think that's it's really important. I mean, if you're going to start a podcast, that is kind of where you need to kind of focus yourself as you get experience. I don't think there's anything wrong with throwing yourself out there and and starting to go and kind of figuring it out as you go, because the only way you're going to get there is by doing. So
yeah, and you can. I mean, it doesn't mean. I mean, every show that we've done has meandered their way to try to find their sweet spot, and you can kind of tell sometimes when they start to hit their sweet spot. Back to the Deadhead Cannabis Show, they had a really interesting show. They interviewed the photographer for the Grateful Dead, and so that was really cool. And that opened the door. That opened the door for other. It just seemed that was sort of the breaking point for them. Once they had this guy on the show, then it opened the door for other people that were related, and it just keeps. And that's the cool thing about it. You get 20, 30, 40 shows under your belt, work your groove, figure out what you're doing, what works and what doesn't work, and then it all starts to fall into place, and it can be really fun.
Oh yeah, especially once you kind of get that strategy down. If you have some marketing chops or just some regular knowledge, once you've realized, oh, I'm I'm the Grateful Dead and cannabis person.
Yeah.
Right. All of a sudden, what are some cool like hashtags for cannabis, or what are deadhead hashtags? When I promote my show or clips from my show or images from my show, I should use those tags, and then all of a sudden you build it out. And you're like, my website doesn't really reflect that. I should tweak it so that it really is cannabis and the Grateful Dead in this example.
That's going back to what we talked about at the beginning, those first questions that I asked somebody: who's your audience? How do you want them to feel? I mean, when the people leave the Deadhead Cannabis show, they've been partly entertained, but and they've also picked up some instruction about where the cannabis industry is going. And the other thing is, I think for these guys, what they do is they connect to people who have been to shows. They just rattle off dates and set lists of the Dead. I have no idea how they can remember this stuff. And other people will be like, oh, I was there. I saw that show. That was great. I remember that. That was awesome when he did that. And I was like, how do you guys remember all this stuff? I can't even remember what I had for lunch yesterday. You guys are remembering, the way that Jerry Garcia started a song
right
in 1987. I'm like, what?
Yeah. Very, very impressive, of course. I mean, targeting those niches also engenders trust to that community, because you know what you're talking about. It's a much easier way to establish yourself as a thought leader. Don't start here, right? Like, I am a marketing thought leader. Like
okay.
Yeah. Like, are you an affiliate marketing, thought leader? Are you a business-to-business affiliate marketing thought leader, right? Get into that niche, like get as specific as you possibly can with your skills and your experience, right?
Narrow and deep. That's right. I keep coming back. Be the best at what you do. Figure out the way that you can be the best. The number one. I want to be the number one podcast for companies that are raising cannabis capital. I want to be the number one. I want to be, when people think, you know what, I'm raising money, I got to figure out a way to get the word out. I want them to think of us immediately. Yep. That's my goal with that show.
Sure. And obviously that's how we know each other. Is, you have a media outlet that talks about cannabis opportunities and investment. We have a platform that provides opportunities for cannabis and investment. And of course, we're rolling out together. Our partnership's been very nice. In fact, our CEO, Wrazel CEO Brian Barbuto, was on Dan's Raising Cannabis Capital show very recently. In fact, that episode dropped today, didn't it?
Yeah, it dropped on what's today's date? The
16th.
The 16th of April. It aired today. It's doing great. And my mom called me this morning and said, wow, that was a really good show you did today. I was like, thanks.
That's very cool. Yeah, I know Brian had a good time on it, and I thought it was a good discussion, although it might be interesting. It's like pre-COVID, so it's really more of a, kind of an overarching view of what was happening before, which actually is probably sort of intriguing at this point to a lot of people. You can find that on MJ Bulls, you can find that on their social profiles, and you can find it on Wrazel's profiles today.
Yeah, it's on Apple or Spotify or anyplace else. But you're right. And that's one of the challenges lately is that with what's happening with the world, things are moving so quickly. We are taping shows a lot closer together to the air date than we used to. I know one of the advantages of working with us for a lot of our hosts is that they only have to sometimes it's once a month, we will schedule a time and we'll pound out all their shows for the whole month. And so, but what we're doing now is that we're adding a tag at the beginning where the interview took place here, but let me tell you what's happening now. And little by little, we're moving to, where we're taping it at the beginning of the week and airing it at the end of the week, because some of this stuff just has to be, it's not as evergreen as it used to be.
No, because current news is changing so rapidly, so quick. Things that you talked about today could be completely dumped on their ear, within the week.
Yeah, we started not as many people are raising capital right now because they're just, kind of just holding tight to see what's going to happen. So to fill in some of that time, we started a Cannabis and Corona show, just about all these companies that are doing well. There's a lot of companies that are doing better since the crisis happened. Yeah,
that's been our experience as well. As the appetite from investors is every bit as large as it was pre-COVID. In fact, maybe more so, because there are opportunities. And while yes, several businesses and some people are kind of pausing to kind of strategize, that's when you got to strike. And that's what we're definitely seeing. Like I would say that we at Wrazel have had an uptick in terms of people reaching out to us, asking for our help and helping them raise capital. And our investor network is definitely making some moves. So, while some of it's going here, the people who can benefit from this environment right now are definitely recognizing that and moving forward as such.
We've had a lot of shows. We've done a lot of shows over the last, I think we're on episode 6 right now on that series, where these companies are doing much better since the virus than they were before, because it just fell right into their lap. Whatever they were doing, we had a company on that has a home rosin press, sits right on your counter like your blender, and these guys are killing it.
Sure.
Because everyone's like, well, I'm going to start crafting. I need a hobby. I need a hobby. Yeah. So you wouldn't. There are companies out there that are just killing it right now, and so that's what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to stay. There's enough doom and gloom with Corona. We don't need another podcast about that, but we need a podcast about the good things that have happened because of it, and that's what this show is. So we started that, I think, 3 weeks ago, and like I said, we're up to episode 6 on this one, and it's got a lot of traction.
That's great. And I agree. I mean, this show, my show, this Connecting Cannabis, we seek to be, much like yourself and yours, informative, optimistic if possible, but realistic, but also I'm not trying to paint doom and gloom, because honestly, from our perspective, that's not what's happening. That said, you got to acknowledge that, a lot of people are struggling right now and that it's difficult. And you have to, as a business owner, I think, be willing to acknowledge that and help if you can, and provide kind of, not hope, but realistic, try to solve problems, try to address them head on. And if you do that, you can speak about that in a very forward thinking, positive manner.
Sure. I actually think that cannabis entrepreneurs as a whole are sort of predisposed to succeed in this environment, because we've been dealing with just this uncertainty since day one. So this is just, this is one more uncertainty that, we're just roll with the punches, versus you take some of these other industries that it's pretty steady. There's not a lot of, say you're in the dry cleaning business, your life is turned upside down because that's a pretty steady business. It's not a lot has changed over the years. Right. And so they're probably like, holy smokes, what do I do now?
Yep.
Whereas the cannabis industry is like, okay, we got to deal with the FDA today. Oh, okay, now we got to deal with the DEA today. Oh, okay, now we got to deal with the IRS today. It's like something new is hitting you every single day. So I think we've been prepared for this, or preparing for this since we started.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great point, and I think it's well made, because, cannabis as a whole has been through much more adversity, like you're saying, than, almost any other kind of space or industry or segment, whatever you want to call it, that I can think of.
This is just another bump in the road.
Yeah, in a way, yes, absolutely. And, and so, yes, I would agree that as a whole, people in the industry are maybe more prepared. Not to mention, you couch that with the fact that, it's definitely, labeled as essential, right? It's an essential service right now in this time of everybody's needs. So I think those two things really combine to kind of make it what it is right now, which is...
Yeah, I think I think we're more mentally prepared. I mean, like our business, everyone's business. And I think that the entrepreneurs in the cannabis industry are more mentally prepared to roll with the punches than probably any other industry that I can think of.
I think you might be right. I mean, that's certainly been my experience talking to, folks like yourself and all the other people that, you and or I talk to in a given day. A lot of people recognizing the issue, very straightforward about how they've had to adjust, and then just let's go. We're moving forward. We made our plans. We're agreed on them. We've got ourselves buttoned up. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Dan, always a pleasure. Let's let everybody know where they can find you and MJ Bulls out there.
Sure, go to mjbulls.com. Pretty simple, and check out all of our shows, and you can always look us up on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher. We're on all the networks. So, Brian, thanks again for having me on the show. It was a lot of fun.
Of course, my pleasure as always, Dan. I look forward to doing it again sometime soon, or I'll be on yours.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Let's make a date.
Have a good one. Thank you so much for being here, Dan. And thank you, everybody, for listening to Connecting Cannabis. We'll see you next time. Take care.